Two men were called on in a large classroom to recite Psalms 23. One was an orator trained in speech techniques and drama. He repeated Psalms in a powerful way. When he was finished, the audience cheered and asked for an encore that they might hear his wonderful voice again. Then the other man repeated the same words. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." But when he finished, no sound came from the class. Instead, people sat in a mood of deep devotion and prayer. Then the first man stood to his feet and said, "I have a confession to make. The difference between what you have just heard from my friend and what you heard from me is this. I know Psalms, but my friend knows the shepherd." John used many images in his gospel, but my favorite one is that of Jesus as the Good Shepherd. Like a shepherd, Jesus is concerned with the welfare and the care of his sheep. The shepherd loves his sheep. Jesus calls himself the Good Shepherd. He didn't call himself King Jesus. He didn't call himself President Jesus. Or he didn't even call himself commissioner, mayor, doctor, reverend, deacon, or chairman. But he called himself a shepherd, a servant, a caretaker, a watchman, a provider. He called himself a shepherd. That's what really stands out in my mind. We are his people and the sheep of his pasture. We depend on God for everything, and just as a shepherd watches over his sheep, so does God watch over his children. Two caretakers were mentioned in this account: the Good Shepherd and the hired hand. The hired hand had no connection with the sheep. He thought of himself first and the sheep last. If a sheep was attacked by a wolf or lost, oh well. Then there is the Good Shepherd. The Good Shepherd is the owner of the sheep. He has a special relationship with them. Most owners did not own a lot of sheep. A flock of 100 was huge. Most flocks were no larger than 10 or 20 sheep, and they were like valued pets. There was nothing about their sheep that the Good Shepherd did not know. The individual sheep in a flock all look alike to the untrained eye, but a Good Shepherd, however, can tell them apart, often because of their markings or particular traits. A shepherd was explaining this to a friend who was surprised on the knowledge of each animal. "You see that sheep over there?" he asked him. "Notice how its feet toe in a little. The one behind him walks kind of sideways. The next one has a patch of wool off its back, where one with the black mark under its eye, while the one closest to us has a small piece torn out of its ear." He knew each by name. These were not just sheep. They were Patch, Limpy, Blackie, Tag, Nosy, and so on. By day and night, the shepherd lived with them. He was always there for them. You see, a shepherd, in order to know his sheep and care for them, has to live amongst them. He has to be close to them. Jesus came from heaven to earth to be close to his sheep. The Good Shepherd became a sheep, took on our nature, and lived life just like us, except without sin. That's why he is the Good Shepherd. Jesus, the Good Shepherd, knows the particular traits of his flock and watches over us with love and concern. A cemetery had a tombstone that the following epitaph. Paul, stranger, when you pass by me. As you are now, I once was. As I am now, so will you be. So prepare for death and follow me. An unknown passerby scratched the following reply underneath. To follow you, I'm not content until I know which way you went. Shepherds go before their flock. They lead their flock, never asking them to do anything that they wouldn't do first. And the sheep follow him because they know his voice. Even though the flock might mingle together, each flock knows its own shepherd's voice. And each would follow its own shepherd and no other. I remember as a kid going to my Pa Toten's farm where he had cows. And I would go and help feed. Now the cows would be out in the pasture away from us. So to save time, Paul had a special call that he would use. He would call and soon the cows would appear in the feedlot out of the pasture. Now he taught me that call, but it took a while before the cows would actually respond to me. So until they did, I had to rely on Paul to get them moving. Now sometimes it takes us a little while before we respond to God's call as well. There was a man in Australia who was arrested and charged with stealing a sheep. But he vigorously protested that it was one of his own that had been missing for many days. When the case went to court, the judge did not know how to decide the matter. Finally, he asked them to bring the sheep in to the courtroom. Then he ordered the plaintiff to step outside and call the animal. The sheep made no response except to raise its head and look frightened. The judge then instructed the defendant to go to the courtyard and call the sheep. When the accused man began to make his distinct call, the sheep ran towards the door and that voice. It was obvious he recognized the familiar voice of his master. His sheep knows him, said the judge. Case dismissed. My sheep know my voice. Now there's an announcer, Dave Johnson. He has called the Triple Crown race for ABC for several years. When away from the horse races, Johnson does a great deal of commercial and voiceover work. I tried out for a spot in a commercial where they wanted someone to say, "They're off," Johnson said. The casting director told him, "I want you to sound like the guy who calls the Kentucky Derby." "No problem," I said. "I am the guy who calls the Kentucky Derby." He says, "I figured I was a cinch to get the part. The funny thing is, I didn't. Apparently there was someone else who sounded more like me than I did." Jesus in this chapter describes a sheep pen. It has only one door. When the sheep return to the fold at night, after a day of grace in pleasant pastures, the shepherd stood at that doorway and inspected each one with tender care as they entered. If a sheep was scratched or wounded by thorns, the shepherd would anoint it with oil to help the healing. If they were thirsty, he gave them water. After all been counted and brought into the pen, the shepherd would lay across the doorway so no intruders could enter. The shepherd became the door. Jesus is the good shepherd who protects and sustains the life of the sheep. Jesus said, "I am the gate for the sheep." When Jesus laid down his life for the sheep, he saved us from being destroyed by wolves of sin and death. He gave his life to kill them and take away their powers so they don't destroy the flock. But if the story ended here, we'll have a problem. If a flock of sheep loses their shepherd because he laid down his life to save them from a pack of wolves, they are now shepherdless. And even if no more wolves come, soon they'll wander off and get lost. And the death of the shepherd would have been in vain. But the story doesn't end here with the shepherd dead and the sheep scattered. Verse 18 would tell us why. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have the power to lay it down, and I have the power to take it up again. I have received this command from my Father. Now, under the Old Testament law, the sheep died for the shepherd. But now the good shepherd dies for the sheep. In the book Chicken Soup for the Soul, Eric Butterworth tells the story of a college professor who had his sociology class go into the Baltimore slums to get a case history on 200 young boys. The students were asked to write an evaluation for each boy's future. In every case, the students wrote, "He hasn't got a chance." 25 years later, another sociology professor came across these early studies. He had his students do a follow-up on the same 200 boys who were now men. With the exception of 20 boys who had moved away or died, the students learned that 176 of the remaining 180 had achieved more than ordinary success as lawyers, doctors, and businessmen. The professor was astounded and decided to pursue the matter further. Fortunately, all the men were in the area, and he was able to ask each one, "How do you account for your success?" In each case, the reply came with the feeling and the saying, "There was a teacher." Now, the teacher was still alive, so he sought her out and asked this old but still alert lady what magic formula she had used to pull these boys out of the slum into a successful achievement. The teacher's eyes sparkled. Her lips broke into a gentle smile. "It's really very simple," she said. "I loved those boys." Their success was based on the love of a teacher. Our success as followers of Jesus is based on the love of our shepherd, who was willing to lay down his life for us. He loved us enough that our sinfulness became his burden. He loved us enough that his perfect rightness became ours. He loved us enough to suffer on the cross for us, to save us from eternal death, to prepare us to meet his Father. He will keep us safe in his sheepfold if we're smart sheep and follow the Good Shepherd. May you grow in the grace and knowledge of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ.